Thank you, Catherine. Good afternoon. Glad you're here. First, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out today, and cold as it is, and snowstorms and blizzards coming across our country, and to especially coming out today and bringing to the forefront the issue of interoperability in communications. This is a very, very important time for public safety, and it's an extremely important time for all of those that, and most of those that are in this room, particularly in the wireless industry. Over the past few months, public safety organizations, carriers, policyholders, public officials, public interest groups debated the fate of the 10 megahertz piece of the broadband wireless spectrum known as the D block. First, I'd like to recognize all those that are in our Connect Public Safety Now coalition, including two of the largest public safety organizations, Fraternal Order of Police, International Association of Firefighters. Thank you for being here in your service. I had the opportunity over my many years to work with first responders many, many times across our country. And at every event that we all responded to, from the federal, state, and local, it was always problematic for communications. Many times you would use runners to communicate back and forth from operation centers to the fields. But also with us today is a leading organization who represents over 500,000 current former public safety officials, and we have brought together a broad-based group of stakeholders who believe strongly that the auction of D block is the most efficient and effective way to ensure construction of a reliable, cost-effective interoperability network for our nation's first responders and its citizens. These coalition members include T-Mobile, Sprint, RCA Rural Telecommunications Group, Metro PCS, Triad Communications, Cellular South, Xandu, Access Spectrum, as well as consumer and public interest groups like Public Knowledge and Media Access Project, and think tanks such as the New American Foundation. You know, this problem with interoperability didn't start with 9/11. I remember very well back in 1994, 1990 Northridge earthquake, 1995, the bombing of the Murray Building in Oklahoma City. And I can remember back all of these different events under those 350 federal disasters that we had to respond to. This has been a problem for the last decade. And we're not even close to resolving this problem. If they take the D block and spread that out through public safety, where are they going to get the funding from the national, the state, and local level to even come close to building this system out over the next 10 years? With the budget crisis we have in our country now, at the federal level, with the budget crisis we're having in states and local governments, someone recently told me that there was 8 states pretty close to being at the point of bankrupting. And you look at what California is going through right now, there is no way that if they put $23 billion into this effort and expect the states and locals to come up with 20% of this, there's no way they can do that. It's impossible. When we have all of this technology available now that could be put together, a public-private partnership that could start solving this problem sooner than later. When you have kids that has cell phones that has more capability than a public service official or first responder, that's unacceptable. We will have another terrorism attack in some form. We're getting more threats. They're doing a good job of blocking these threats, but we're going to have more. We're going to have more natural disasters. Whether you believe in climate change or global warming or what, you look at how many hurricanes that was named this past year or this year, and you look at what we may be facing in the next. Look at Katrina. When I got there 3 days after the hurricane, and I was in that operation center, the 800 megahertz was down, it was gone. All cellular towers were down and gone. And if it hadn't been for the Sprints, T-Mobiles, and Verizon, and everybody else coming together, providing that communications equipment down there, they could never have even accomplished anything. So a reliable interoperability system is what our first responders, public safety, and what our citizens needs today. And our nation's first responders, I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Congressional Far Caucus banquet in Washington, have you? There will be 2,500 firefighters come in there. And there's a Congressional caucus that does this every year. And I never will forget the last one that I attended. I shouldn't tell this on Senator McCain, but I will. He was always great to me and very gracious to me working with him over the years. But anyway, we were there, and Michael Brown was the director of FEMA at that time. And I was sitting up on the dais, and Senator McCain was the keynote speaker that night. And Michael Brown was sitting down at a table in front of the stage. And while Senator McCain was getting his notes ready for the speech, well, Michael Brown came up, and we were talking and visiting, you know. And Senator McCain turned around and saw me, and he came up, and he reached up, you know, and said, "Mr. Witt, I just want to tell you what a great service you did to our country," and shook my hand and said, "I thank you for it." I said, "Well, thank you, Senator." I said, "You know Michael Brown, the new director of FEMA?" And he said, "Yes, sir, I know Mr. Brown," shook his hand and pointed at him and said, "You're doing a shitty job," and walked off. Michael Brown looked at me, and you know, his mouth was open, you know, like mine too. But he said, "What have I done to him?" I said, "I don't know, but you better fix it." But that's what we have to do today. We have to fix this problem. And we cannot let this go forward in a way that's going to, actually, it'll cheat the taxpayers out of a system that this country needs now, not later, and cost the taxpayers billions of dollars if we don't get this D block auctioned off, where it will at least put money back into the Treasury and not spend it on something that may take 15 years to accomplish, because it's not cost effective to do this. I want to tell you some of the scenes that I was at. And I never will forget one time we were out in Oregon, and I asked the police chief and the sheriff, I said, how does your deputies communicate with each other? I said, "We agree to meet in a parking lot and roll the window down." You know, I mean, it's not, I mean, the technology is there today to do this. It's not that there's not a lack of interest and support for this. It's there. It's the political and the human element that is keeping this from moving forward in a way for our country can truly develop this nationwide. A lot of people may not think it, but there's a lot of areas in this country, if they're proposing to go forward the way they're planning on doing this, a lot of these areas will never be covered. I mean, if you're not a city of a populace of 1 million or whatever, if the coverage, what about the rural areas? What about the rural fire departments? What about the sheriffs? What about those local police chiefs in small town of America? They need interoperability as well, because they've got big problems. They don't have the capacity that most major metropolitans have. And they have to rely on each other, and they have to rely on mutual aid coming to help them when something happens. And communicating that back and forth from a county and a city is really critical.